And thank you very much. Apologies for the delay there. Good afternoon. As I've said before, in my view, housing is the single most urgent and important social issue facing our country at this moment in time. And it is one I am determined that we as a government get to grips with. Access to housing is not just about the immediate material need for a roof over your head, although the absolute tragedy of homelessness is one that we are determined to eliminate by the end of the decade. It is about much more than that. Access to housing is fundamental to our security, stability, health, and progress as a nation. When a family has a secure tenure in a safe and comfortable home, children have the peace and the potential to do better at school and develop their wider personality and sense of identity. Parents have the freedom and the confidence to engage with and help develop their local communities and build sporting, artistic, and cultural connections. Communities of secure, engaged, and confident households are safer, more enriched, and happier places to live. A country of engaged and contented communities is a more attractive place to visit, establish a business, or invest in. And greater prosperity means more investment in education and healthcare, more opportunities for our young people, and better outcomes for everyone. It all comes back to housing. And right now, we are in a housing crisis. There are not enough homes being built, and a generation of people are demoralised and close to despair on the issue. There is scarcely a family in the country untouched by the crisis. And if we do not recognise the scale of the challenge and respond in kind, it has the potential to be profoundly destabilising for our country. The plan we are presenting today recognises the scale of the challenge. Housing for all is unprecedented in our country's history in terms of its scope, its scale, and its ambition. It is supported by the largest ever housing budget in our history and represents a direct and radical intervention in the housing market by the Irish state. Housing for all addresses the challenges facing first-time buyers, renters, low-income households, people experiencing homelessness, people trading up and right-sizing, people starting again in life. It has tailored plans at community level, addresses the particular challenges and opportunities in towns and cities, and has a tailored and specific approach for rural Ireland. It includes some of the most fundamental changes to our planning and land use system in the country's history. And it addresses the needs of the women and the men who we need to build new homes. My colleague, Minister Darragh O'Brien, and his team and department, working with colleagues throughout government, have put in an extraordinary effort over the last year in challenging circumstances to bring this together, and he will set out the detail of the key pillars of the plan shortly. But first, I want to sound a note of caution. No plan on its own can solve our housing crisis. There is no easy or immediate fix. How I want housing for all to be differentiated is the entirely new focus on and demand for delivery that is built into it. Solving this problem requires hard work. I worry sometimes that whole of government is one of those phrases that have become so overused and hackneyed over the years as to have become almost meaningless. But the fact is that the social emergency that is our housing crisis cannot and will not be solved by any one department on its own. If, as a government, we are to meet this challenge, we must all be invested in delivering on housing for all. And for that reason, a new Housing for All delivery group is being established. It will comprise the Secretary-Generals of all relevant government departments and will be chaired by my department. It will be responsible for all aspects of delivery of this plan. Quarterly progress reports will be submitted to the Cabinet Committee on Housing and to the Government, setting out performance against the targets and actions set out in the plan, prepared by a dedicated unit in my department. These progress updates will include dashboard statistics that will provide a transparent overview of performance in all major aspects of the plan. A new Programme Delivery Office will be located within the Department of Housing to support implementation of housing, to support implementation of the plan, across the department, as well as local authorities and approved housing bodies. There will be nowhere to hide. I'm satisfied that with this plan, the resources being allocated to it and the unflinching focus on delivery within it, we have come up with a strategy that is equal to the scale of the challenge we face. But the hard truth is that the scale of the challenge is such that national government on its own cannot fix it. As an entire society, we need to understand the challenge and internalise the threat to our way and quality of life that failure to provide housing will represent. We all need to get out of our comfort zones. Too many developments are being rejected by all political parties and none across the country. Too much of the discussion about housing is dominated by pointless rhetoric and sterile, circular political bickering. The bottom line is that if we want to safeguard and further build upon the prosperity and stability that the Irish people have achieved over generations, the state needs to build homes, and the private sector needs to build homes, and at scale. This plan gives us the tools, the resources, and sets out the path to make that happen. It states as a central aim that everyone in the state should have access to a home to purchase or rent at an affordable price, built to a high standard and in the right place, offering a high quality of life. That is our standard. As a country, over the last year and a half, we have shown that when we're faced with a fundamental threat to our well-being, we have the ability to do whatever is necessary to organise ourselves and reorient our priorities to meet that threat and protect ourselves from it. What I am saying today is that the housing crisis is a fundamental threat to our nation's well-being, cohesion and social progress, and that we are prepared and have the plan to do what is necessary to meet it and to beat it. Gurmila Mahagwif. Leo.
Thanks very much, Taoiseach. Very pleased to be here today to endorse Housing for All, and want to congratulate Darragh in particular on his team on all the work that they've done to put this together. I really want to welcome the focus in this document on home ownership. Owning your own home is very much part of our culture as Irish people, part of our society, and this is a housing plan for everyone, but is very strong on home ownership too, and I think that's really important. Knocking on doors in the last couple of elections and talking to people every day, I'm often struck by the extent to which the housing crisis impacts really on everyone in our society, whether it's people who are renting, for whom rents are too high, first-time buyers who can't afford to buy and are stuck in a rent trap, older people who are homeowners and they're secure in their own home ownership and their own home, but they're angry on behalf of their adult kids who are still living with them, or perhaps renting but can't afford to buy their own home. Families that can't upsize, bringing up kids in a small apartment or a small house with no back garden, students who can't get accommodation, people who fall off the ladder into homelessness, and of course has an impact on business and investment too, because the housing crisis is driving up labour costs and making it harder for businesses to recruit staff and secure investment. So this document is a radical new departure in housing policy in Ireland, both in terms of content and scale, but it also builds on the progress that we made in recent years. So we have now a rent freeze in real terms, building on the rent pressure zones. We have the Rebuilding Ireland Home Loan, which is now going to be extended and expanded and made more attractive, helping more people to get a mortgage that they can afford. We have Help to Buy, which gives people tax back to go towards their deposit. Housing First, which is going to be scaled up to help reduce homelessness. The social housing programme is going to be scaled up even more. Not that long ago, 2016, we only built about 600 social houses in the state. That went up to 6,000 just before the pandemic, and we're now planning 9,000 next year, possibly the highest in the history of the state. The LDA is now a reality. It has a big budget and extensive borrowing capacity, and it is going to be our state developer. And I think in time people will see the creation of the LDA as big a state intervention as the IDA was when it comes to industrial policy, or the ESB was when it came to energy policy. Cost rental is now a reality and is going to be scaled up. Shared equity schemes, which have worked well in the past, are back. And we've set the target of building more than 40,000 homes every year by the end of the decade. Hopefully we can achieve that sooner. We'd like to achieve it sooner, but we're very aware of the real capacity constraints that exist around skills and service land, for example. But that 40,000 target, I think, is really important. And of course, the whole plan is backed by a budget of €4 billion a year, which is the biggest ever housing budget in the history of the state, and double what it was only a few years ago. So this document is the housing policy for the duration of this government. It gives certainty to builders, to buyers, and to investors. And now we focus on implementation, focus on delivery, and that's going to be done on a cross-government basis, not just Minister O'Brien on his own, but every minister and every department contributing in its way to dealing with this housing crisis once and for all. Thank you.
Eamon.
Thank you, Taoiseach. It's housing for all because it has to be all sorts of different solutions for all sorts of different people in different circumstances, be that a refugee, a traveller, a student, a downsizer, a renter. But there's one group I particularly just thinking of today. I think there were in recent days we saw a graph of our population statistics and showed the number of population growth starting to flatten. And there's a real risk that that will start to fall because we have actually the oldest age pretty much in the Western world, I think, or anywhere in the world, where we start to have children. And I think that's some by choices, all very well, but I think a lot of the time the choice has been forced on people because it's really hard to set up a home, to be able to raise a family in so many parts of our country. It's so expensive, so difficult. And I think this strategy, this policy has to address that. We do that by bringing down the cost and getting the design right, the quality right, good homes. But also, we do that by creating certainty. Heard the Tánaiste earlier on today saying that's the way when you big capital projects, reduce the certainty, you reduce the cost. We do that, firstly, by reforming the planning system, a wider reform, following the national planning framework, which is the right planning, it's the right green, sustainable planning framework. Better balanced regional development, compact development, and low carbon development. Our planning system is not working well in how we meet that, and that's a key thing government has to deliver this plan. Secondly, we have to deliver the tax changes that are set out in this plan. Radical changes. This is not a small change where we start saying, yes, we tax land, zoned land, so it's not laying idle, so it's not developers deciding policy, it's public interest. And we tax better vacant properties. And we introduce the land value sharing system. So some of the gain that comes from rezoning goes back to the public interest so we can invest in the infrastructure to lower the cost, to make it quality, to make it all work. Tánaiste is right. The LGA is a significant development. The increased lending for it is a major part of this new plan. The provision of public lands complements that. The likes of the institutions I work, Dublin Port, CIE and others, to say those lands, we need them now to house our people so we live close to the centre, we deliver that compact development growth. That we deliver cost rental at scale, this is just the start of it. Once we learn how to do it, we're going to ramp it up massively. And that we do town centre first and intervene in terms of finding those sites in the centre of our towns that could and should be developed to bring life back to the centre of our cities, good places to raise a family. This policy has sustainability written right the way through it, in better BER ratings, in reduced waste in construction, in transport-led development, so we build new housing around public transport so that it's truly sustainable. And lastly, what we need to do to deliver it. I heard Minister Simon Harris on the radio this morning. He's absolutely right. For those students getting the Leaving Cert results tomorrow, this plan gives out a message. Think of going into construction. Look at the apprenticeship schemes that have been set up. We've 27,000 jobs in housing construction we're going to need. I have another similar number, 25, 27, 30,000 we're going to need to do the retrofitting we need to do on climate. And this is going to happen. Half the housing in the lifetime of this government is going to be delivered by the state. We have the funding for it, we have the political commitment to do it, we have the planning approach. It's now our job to make it happen, to deliver it for all our people.
Darragh.
Thank you, Taoiseach, and Tánaiste, Minister Ryan, indeed, for being here on this important day to launch our new housing plan for Ireland. This government is keenly aware of the challenges facing people across this country. We know the impact of the housing crisis is felt in every single family across our country, from hard-pressed tenants stuck in a rent trap, wondering will they ever be able to own their own home, to those at the sharpest edge of the crisis, who will spend tonight sleeping in emergency accommodation, or worse, sleeping on the streets in one of our cities. It is only by taking measures across all aspects of our housing system that we can begin to improve the situation for all our citizens across the board. That is what this plan is all about. It's a whole-of-government approach to get to grips with this crisis and to improve the lives for all of our people. Housing for All is the most ambitious housing plan in the history of our state. It sets out over 4 pathways, a series of very bold actions that rise to the challenge, backed up by, as the Taoiseach and Tánaiste has said already, unprecedented financial commitment in excess of €4 billion per annum. Over 300,000 new homes will be built by the end of 2030, including a projected 90,000 new social homes, 36,000 new affordable purchase homes, and 18,000 new cost rental homes. It is the largest state building programme in our history, eclipsing even the heydays of the 40s and 50s. It is the most significant intervention by the state in housing ever. It is fully funded, it is multi-annual, and a multi-billion euro plan. Our plan, as the Taoiseach has said, puts forward a new vision that places home ownership back in the hands of ordinary working people. The First Home scheme will see people buy their home with the help of the government by bridging the gap between the finance they have and the finance they need to get the home that they want. The local authority-led affordable purchase scheme will see homes at an average of €250,000 available across the country. A reformed local authority mortgage scheme will see more single people eligible than ever for state-backed mortgages, while interest rates will be reduced for all new applicants. The affordability measures provided for in this plan will set us on a path to reversing the current trend, which has seen home ownership rates fall to historic lows. I believe in home ownership, and this plan supports it. The introduction, as Minister Ryan has said, of cost rental, a brand new tenure in Ireland, will result in thousands of individuals and families renting safe and secure homes for rates at least 25% below the open market value. We're empowering our local authorities to get back building again, and with their AHB partners, they will deliver an average of 10,000 social homes each year under this plan. The plan also includes modern-day Kenny report-style measures to ensure that the state gets a fairer share of the increase in the value of land resulting from rezoning decisions, and that the community benefits as a result, a radical change. Major planning decisions will be returned to local authorities and will be subject to very strict timeframes, while judicial reviews will be overhauled to unblock obstacles to development. Rural communities will be given greater certainty over building in their own areas. These measures are targeted, they're radical, but they're necessary, and they're necessary to respond to the challenges that we have. As the Taoiseach has said, despite the pandemic, government have been focused on progressing major reforms that will accelerate and increase the supply of housing across our country, public, affordable and private. We got to work straight away last year, while at the same time developing this very plan that we're launching today. We passed the first ever comprehensive Affordable Housing Act and reformed the LDA, giving it a legislative backing and adding to its powers. And just recently, we opened Ireland's first cost rental homes, which were 50% below the open market rent value in that development. We've also, very importantly, signed the Lisbon Declaration, which commits this government and this state to ending homelessness by 2030. We increased grant funding to assist older people and people with disability. As the Taoiseach has said, we extended the rent pressure zones and we've limited rent increases to general inflation. we introduced 5 different separate pieces of tenancy legislation over the past year to protect renters through the pandemic. We brought back 3,600 vacant social homes into productive use, and we increased Irish Water funding by over 100 million, and we banned co-living. These actions demonstrate the government's commitment to fixing our housing system. Housing for All takes that commitment a step further on the pathway to a sustainable housing system by clearly setting out how we plan to address the serious short, medium and long-term challenges to 2030. Is é tíochta an príomh éisiúnt in éireann inniu. Tuigeann an rialtas é sin. Ní mór dúin fiosú ar watha len ar níní, agus táimid in ann é a dhéanamh. Is é seo an phlean tíochta is tábhachtach riamh. Táimid ag infestú níos mó airgid ná riamh ar son ar níní, beagnach 20 billiún euro sna 2 bliain amach. Curamid únarachtaí I lár an bheartas, tithe cheannach ar price réasúntaach, agus den céadúir tithe cís ar price réasúnta freisin. Feicimid níos mó tithe sosialta tóca ná riamh. An buath lom go méid a tithe féin ag daoine, ó bróigh an plán seo, tíochta coch. The housing system is complex. There's no silver bullet, and I can't tell you that it'll be fixed overnight. But this government have the solutions, we have the ability, this country has the drive and the determination to make a real impact. Now we've a radical plan that's fully financed to levels never seen before. This plan will make a real difference for real people. And together we as a government are determined to make this work.
Thank you.
Thanks. Taoiseach, you mentioned that there'll be quarterly delivery targets. Will they be published in advance? And will there be targets for average rent to come down? If so, by how much? And just secondly, an awful lot of large housing developments are objected to, and some of them end up in the courts. I know you referenced reform of judicial review legislation, planning legislation there, but that's not something that's going to happen very quickly, I assume.
We'll let the Taoiseach first, and I'll come back
First
to the judicial.
First of all, we will be transparent in terms of the targets that are laid out in the plan, and there's detailed targets in terms of the numbers of housing and the different categories that we want to build on an ongoing basis in terms of both affordable houses, in terms of social housing, and in terms of the homeless issue, housing first targets, and then in terms of the private sector. So those progress reports will be published and will be set against the targets that are outlined in the plan itself. In respect of rent, as the Minister has said, he has already taken action in terms of rent increases, limiting it to the consumer price index in the rent pressure zones, which is a significant move that he has already legislated for. The key issue for us is supply. The key issue to enable that will be capacity of the sector. And given the scale of the resources that have been allocated, over 4 billion, that is the challenge for delivery in terms of both manpower, in terms of men and women working in the sector, in terms of curbing inflationary pressures, in terms of the overall scale of the intervention by the state in this particular sector. So that is why we have a clear, streamlined implementation unit.
Sorry, if minimum rents are too expensive,
yeah,
will be targets in it? Will there be specific targets to bring rents down?
Well, there's a target there over time if we get the supply up to get rents down, yes. Mm-hmm. But the key targets that we will be benchmarking are those that are contained in the plan in terms of supply.
Just to add to that, if I could, Taoiseach, and
yeah.
just on the rents as well, we publish the RTB rent index, which is rent that's paid, not what rent is asked for. And we've seen actually over the course of the last year, particularly in this city, but in the urban centres, a flattening out of rents in certain parts, but an increase outside of the main cities, and that's something we're watching. We've yet to see the effect of the measures that this government brought in, which is linking rent increases to general inflation, and we're going to watch that very closely. I wouldn't underestimate the effect that cost rental will have. We've been very specific on our targets across all tenures. This is a new tenure, and we're aiming to deliver at least 2,000 cost rental homes per year. We've already started delivering them. And if you take the instance that I referenced earlier on, in the town of Balbriggan, the rents in that estate are 50% below the open market rent, because they're just covering the cost of developing, maintaining and managing that development. So that in itself, through increasing supply, increasing cost rental and upping the build, will have a downward pressure on rents there too. But we have an issue with supply. We've lost 26,000 homes over the last 2 years, last year and this year, on what needed to be built. And we now are showing a trajectory as to how we can get that number back up to levels that are sustainable, and to deliver sustainable both rental, cost rental, affordable and private. On your question on judicial review reform, we've embarked already on a very significant reform of our planning system. We're bringing planning back to the local authorities and going to resource them. And in the plan you will see that we have very strict set timeframes for decisions. But on judicial review reform, we'll have the first piece of legislation on that in the autumn schedule. There's a good bit of work to be done. The first judicial reform review bill will be brought out, but there'll be more to it. And my department is working directly with the Attorney General and his team on some significant changes that we need to see there to unblock housing delivery and homes across the country, whilst recognising and accepting the fact that absolutely people have a right to make observations in that, but there are elements within our planning system that need to be reformed, and that's clearly set out in the Housing for All document which we've published today.
Sorry, the other call.
You're talking about a 9 or 10-year plan here, and in the press release you're talking about averages, the average creation of 30,000 units per year. Would you be able to explain to the public what are they going to see that's going to be different within 2 years, within a very, very close time? What are the things that the numbers are going to see, the houses that are going to be delivered, particularly in things like cost rental, social and affordable housing?
Sure. We've detailed that, the exact thing, and what we're looking at here is that we will look to be delivering 6,000 affordable homes per year. They're new. They're new affordable housing delivered by our local authorities, delivered through our Home First shared equity scheme, which will start in the first quarter of next year. We'll have our first affordable homes for sale actually later on this year in Cork, but we're building that up, and we'll have our 2,000 cost rental homes per year is what we're targeting. So we're targeting a minimum of 6,000. We will see the Land Development Agency break ground on their sites. And a significant part of the plan as well is the near-time delivery with the Land Development Agency, that we want them to activate dormant planning permissions that are out there, that they will be buying and they will be developing out. So what we will see from next year is a significant ramping up of house building and home building. But really importantly, what we're going to see for all those people out there who have been scrimping and saving and paying rent, whilst trying to save for a deposit and get a mortgage, they're going to have real options now. Real options for the state will step in and bridge that gap between what a person can get and what a person needs to buy a home through the equity scheme. So we're seeing from next year, we will see thousands of affordable homes, and we've planned that out. We've seen how we're going to increase that over the term of this plan, and indeed on social housing. We've set a very significant new build target for next year of 9,000. We have been affected, our construction output, by COVID. We need to build up that capacity. We need about 27,000 additional workers, as Minister Ryan has referenced earlier on, to deliver on this plan. But the certainty that Housing for All gives the sector, the fact that the state is now on a multi-annual basis backing this plan with over €20 billion in capital, in itself, I believe, will have a very significant effect in the sector looking at where it needs to point its housing delivery to, i.e. in the area of our first-time buyers. Only today, actually, I signed the regulations that will now, on every new estate where permission has been granted, 10% social, which has been protected. We've added 10% affordable on private housing delivery as well. So people will see big changes soon, and very soon, and I'm talking into next year.
Just to follow up, you talk about eliminating homelessness. By what date will homelessness be eliminated?
We as a government made a decision a couple of months ago, and I brought a memo to government in relation to the Lisbon Declaration, which asked all EU member states to sign up to the eradication of homelessness by 2030. We have signed that, and I've signed that on behalf of the government. And I believe it's important we set that as our target within this plan. Homelessness is far too high. We've over 8,000 people with no home. But what we have seen in the last year is significant reductions, particularly in child and family homelessness. We've also seen, though, unfortunately, a stubborn plateauing of homelessness among single people. And we need more accommodation. We need to focus more one-bedroom units in that space in particular. But what we're doing also is we're going to expand Housing First. And what Housing First is a mechanism that is going to have wraparound services for people. It's worked very well. We've retention of 90% of tenancies in that space, over 600 tenancies in place now. We're going to increase that over the next 5 years to a further 1,200 and indeed up to 1,500. So our plan will be very focused. We'll have a national homelessness oversight committee that will include the stakeholders and our NGOs who I work with every single week, to make sure that the focus is on continuing to drive down homelessness in everything that we do as a government. And we've invested, and rightly so, the resources in that area at a really significant level. So our plan is to move and eradicate homelessness by 2030, as per the declaration that I signed on behalf of the government.
Christina Finn from the Journal. Quite a lot to unpack there in the plan, Minister. Just touching on the cost rental and the rental crisis. Was any consideration given to our tax rent credit, the one that was abolished a number of years ago? Obviously, you have a target for 2,000 cost rental units per year, but people are really hitting their threshold right now at this minute in terms of the rent that they're paying. So is any consideration given to give them a bit of a break, perhaps sooner rather than later? And just on the issue of vacant property tax, I see in the report that it says local property tax returns in November will be reviewed with the view to introducing a new vacant property tax. Are we looking at that for budget? Is that looking perhaps to be a budget measure? I know the Tánaiste was in your manifesto when you're looking to become leader of the party. It seems to have cross-party support. So I'm wondering, I suppose, what the hold-up was, and perhaps putting more detail of that into the plan. And just finally, there was a mention of divorced people in the plan, and I know we had discussed that before in terms of people being stuck, perhaps having recently separated and find themselves in a precarious position in terms of housing. Perhaps you might explain this new plan. And finally, just sorry for Eamon Ryan, there was a mention as well that there might be a minimum BER rating for rental properties, which obviously sounds great for people that are in properties that have mould and all the rest on the wall, but are we not running the risk of perhaps similar problems when we eradicated the bed sits, that we could take a lot of stock out of circulation?
Eamon, do you want to, and then I'll come in on
that last one. We have to avoid that. One of the ways we do it is give advance notice. And it might not apply to every single property. If you're in a Georgian building, very hard to listed building and so on. So it'll have to be specific on properties, which can be done in that way. But the way we overcome that concern is to give advance notice, to give time, and to allow it roll out over a period. But no one should be in a home that's cold. No one should be in a home that's expensive to run. The advantage when you get good building standards is it's better for your health, it's better for your pocket, and it's better for the environment too. So it's the right thing to do.
Just, Christina, on those couple of things, we believe on the rental side already, a reference in my opening remarks, we've brought in 5 very significant pieces of rental legislation, and we've now linked rents to general inflation, which is very important. Also, what we've done is we've limited deposits and upfront payments to a value of 2 months' rent. So there's been a lot being done in this space. Our belief is through cost rental, and delivery of cost rental that we can bring rents down as well. I want to see rents falling. A rent tax credit, yes, we've considered that before. Don't believe that is a measure that's a sustainable measure into the future. I believe what we got to do is focus on creating sustainable supply and the new tenure of cost rental. I actually, not to repeat myself, but I believe that there is massive scope in this space. There's a lot of interest in this space, and I believe the Land Development Agency will play a very significant role in the delivery of cost rental at scale. So you are right what you said at the very beginning. There's a lot in this plan. People will have a look at it and pick it out, and I would encourage people, those who are renting right now, and most renters want to own their own home. Every independent survey that's done, that people who are renting want to be able to be in a position where they can get a home that they call their own. That's why affordable housing and affordable purchase and our shared equity is so important. But now it's also very important that we've effectively state-backed rents through cost rental, where people will now have, long-term rental security of tenure for 40 years. And we do intend to legislate, and it is in the plan as well, for tenancies of indefinite duration. And that is also something that's covered within the plan. The vacant property tax is something that Minister Donoghue and I and government have decided on. We want to collect the data from the LPT returns this November to get a sense for how much is out there, and then Finance will work a plan to look at a tax on vacant properties. So you're looking at next year for that. That is significant in itself. And we are also looking at a tax which has been agreed with Minister Donoghue, Department of Finance, a tax on zoned unused land also. I think that's very important by way of an activation measure. Okay.
Yeah, Michael Brennan from the Business Post. A question for the Taoiseach and the Tánaiste. Given that there's going to be a new delivery group with all the Secretary Generals there, what are you both going to do if you just get excuses as to why actions in the plan aren't being delivered, as seemed to happen with Rebuilding Ireland? And a question for Minister Darragh O'Brien. The land value sharing mechanism in the plan, that's for new planning permissions, as I understand it. Does that mean really we're not going to see much value from that until a long time to come, given all the planning permissions we already have? Thank you.
We will not be tolerating excuses. That's the whole purpose of the Secretary General's group. It's to unblock any attempts or mechanisms that could delay house construction or delay the implementation of the plan. And so it's more about a can-do, problem-solving implementation unit to deal promptly with issues that may arise from time to time. And it's also to say, basically, it's a whole of government issue. We all have to be involved with it. To some, the Department of Higher Education and Research, for example, and further education in terms of the provision of skills programs, apprenticeships, and so on, which Minister Simon Harris is very keen and enthusiastic about in terms of meeting the needs there. In terms of enterprise, as we know, in terms of the role of Enterprise Ireland, in terms of developing a construction centre of excellence. Right across the board, there will be inputs that will be important in terms of ensuring the delivery of this, because we do recognise it as as I said earlier, a huge social crisis for people, and in terms that goes to the heart of the kind of society we want to create in Ireland, and particularly for younger generations in particular, that they can access housing. So this forum is, as I said, no one can hide in terms of not coming forward, in terms of making sure that the Housing for All programme is delivered.
The land value sharing. Do you want me to deal with that? That is a forward. Look, firstly, it is a very, very significant change. There's no question. I think it's been recognised since we've launched the plan as that indeed, and it's been something that's been looked at for a number of years now. I actually think the announcement of it being done, firstly, will have the effect of reducing speculation on land. That's been a big issue. Speculation on unzoned land, rising costs, and rising values even on so this will apply to newly zoned land. Existing zone land that I've referenced earlier on, Michael, that is not developed, will be subject to, following the Minister for Finance's measures that he'll bring forward, to an unzoned land tax. But I actually believe, from a positive perspective, that this plan and the investment behind it by government will actually unlock a lot of undeveloped land. And we have mechanisms within this through the LDA to do that, through the Croí Cónaithe Fund as well, in relation to our cities and our towns, through what we're going to be doing on vacant properties, and through planning changes, particularly with above shop living. that there's like 213 different action points within this plan, but they're all doable. They are challenging, but they're all doable. And now the big difference now is that we have a multi-annual plan that's financed right to 2026 and that will lead us out to 2030. So, you know, the land value share is a very significant change, where the community will share in the benefit of any uplift in the value of land should it be rezoned. But I think the converse of that will be that it will bring down the cost of land. Bring down the cost of land, because those who are speculating in purchasing land will understand in time that that cost is going to be associated to it. So there's a lot of detail in the plan on that space. We will legislate for it. Work is ongoing with the Attorney's Office at the moment on, and that legislation will be brought next year.
I think just to add that, I think in fairness to Rebuilding Ireland, a lot was achieved as a result of that plan, whether it's around pressure zones, the first cost rental developments, Housing First, which did help to bring down homelessness. And in 2016, we only built 600 social houses in the entire country in the year. By 2019, it was 6,000. 2016, only 5,000 new homes were built. By the time the pandemic came around, it was 20,000. So, you know, a lot was done and a lot was achieved. But we are a country with a rising population. There's more than 5 million people living in Ireland now for the first time since the 1870s. And because of our demographics, we've a quite high level of new household formation. So you need extra houses every year just to stand still, let alone deal with the pent-up demand for additional housing. So it wasn't enough, quite frankly. And this is on a different scale. You know, the level of investment in this is roughly double what the level of investment was in Rebuilding Ireland. And the scale of government intervention, government being willing to take risks, being willing to intervene, is well beyond what was in Rebuilding Ireland. I think that's what's fundamentally different. And now what we need to do is drive that through.
How you doing? Paul Osford from the Irish Examiner. Just a couple of questions for Minister O'Brien and then one for the Taoiseach. Minister, there's a lot of measures in this plan that are aimed at lowering building costs, they're aimed at lowering the cost of borrowing in the local authority mortgages. There's a lot of mentions of kind of bridging the gap between affordability, but there's no real sense that there's an attempt to relink our understanding of what affordable is to the average income. It's probably a bit of an existential question, but can you speak to that a little bit? And then in terms of the affordable purchase, the shared equity scheme makes up about half of that out to 2025. Will that scheme continue beyond 2025? And then what will be the actual number of affordable homes as opposed to affordable and shared equity? And then Taoiseach, there's a paragraph in section 6 of this document on a referendum on housing. Would you like to see that referendum progressed in your term as Taoiseach? Would you like it done before the end of next year? And if so, what would you like to see the wording of that referendum be?
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for that. What we've done on affordability, and there's three actual parts to it. One is on the local authority-led affordable housing, where we're looking at housing averaging €250,000, and that will be for medium income families, and we'll be publishing the regulations for that before the end of this year, opening that scheme up. And I don't believe in arbitrary caps, salary caps in schemes. That's why our affordability under the Home First shared equity scheme and under the other one is based on what the person can afford. So basically proving that, that the house is 250,000 is bridging the gap up to that. And it's not a debt-driven scheme either, it's equity-based. And in both of them, in equity, both in the local authority one, the state takes an equity through the local authority to be able to help that person get out of renting or get out from living under their folks into their 30s to be able to buy the house now. And the same is with the Home First shared equity. So someone who has mortgage approval of 250,000, a deposit of 30,000, and they have a 20,000 euro gap that they can't bridge, the state will take that equity and step in, and that will be up and running this year with that being offered to people from the start of next year. It's a game changer, and it will, because there's so many people I talk to who are renting, who don't want to be renting, who are paying £2,000 a month and want to be able to own their own home. Other measures we've taken on cost rental will help in that space. Shared equity will taper off, and I've always said it will be time-bound, it'll be focused, because we want to be building more affordable purchase, and we're going to do that. And as I mentioned earlier on, what I just did today is sign the regulations in every new estate where planning permission is granted, that 10% of those homes have to be affordable and 10% have to be social. Our land development agency in Dublin and Cork, in areas with populations of over 150,000, on the land that they develop will be 100% affordable and social. So this is a real change for people, and will give real hope and will deliver real results for people who want to be able to own their own home at an affordable rate, or indeed rent a home long term at an affordable rate as well. But as I've always said, shared equity will be time bound and focused. And so it will run out at the end of 2025, and the slack will be taken up as we're building more at that stage, with the Part 5 provision being increased to 10%, Land Development Agency building, and also our local authorities building mixed tenure developments, which we're going to be able to do now. And I'll just conclude in affordability. We've now set up an affordable housing fund for our local authorities to be able to, and it's open now, for them to bring forward developments to us, for them to bring forward mixed developments that can be social, cost rental and affordable. And that fund is now in place, and is in place right the way to 2030 and fully funded to the end of 2026. So the week after next, we'll have our housing summits with our chief executives across the country on this and be reinforcing it. So as the Taoiseach and Tánaiste Minister Ryan have rightly said, now it's about delivery in this space. But we've put the foundations in place, if you excuse the pun, through the Affordable Housing Act, through putting the Land Development Agency on a statutory legislative footing, being able to capitalise it, giving it extra borrowing requirements there as well. So now is the time for delivery, and there's real opportunities now in this document, in Housing for All, for our people to be able to own their own homes.
Yeah, the new Commission on Housing that's been established as well will have an input into the referendum issue, but having a lot of experience in terms of referendums, it needs preparation, it needs a degree of consultation in the Oireachtas and with voluntary bodies and society more generally. So it will happen during the lifetime of this government. Whether it happens within the lifetime of my tenure at Taoiseach, that is not the key issue. The point is it has to be properly prepared, good consultation, and a good proposition to be put to the people that can be carried by the people. So I would hope we can accelerate that and get that process up and running, and that is our commitment, and it was part of the programme for government. Who's next?
Casey Urin from News Talk. Minister, just for you, I have two questions. The first is just, why were the incentives to encourage right sizing not introduced at this point in time, and when will that policy be developed? And then the second is, you were saying there about local authorities being held to strict timelines in terms of planning applications. Is there any timeline for a local authority acquiring the 10% of properties in new builds and actually putting people into the houses? And the reason I ask is because I was lucky enough to purchase a new build in your constituency in 2019, and there's a property 3 doors down from me that's been empty for 2 years, and I actually learned last week it's owned by the local authority. So it seems a bit mad to me that there's a property that would be counted as delivered in 2019 and there's no family in it. Is that the kind of thing that's going to continue under the Housing for All?
Well, it shouldn't, and actually afterwards, if you want to give me the address, I'll chase it up with Fingal, because that's not something that should be happening, because every home is valuable, and that house is a family home. There can be complications in certain instances when you look into them, and we do that. But just to ask you, or to answer your question, will there be a time frame? I'm always encouraging our local authorities to make sure that houses are occupied as speedily as possible. And we do come across instances that you've raised. Another one raised with me recently. But I chair the Housing Delivery Task Force myself in my department, that is made up of members of the local authority and indeed the Department of Housing as well. And we have regular contact, particularly in this space. Local authorities are going to deliver homes at a scale never seen before. The Tánaiste is right. They've come up to a level up to 6,000 pre-pandemic. Now we're setting that at new build up to 9,000. And will also be, from there, we will allow a small amount of acquisition. Our focus is going to be on build, and that's what it's going to be. But obviously when they're built, we want to make sure that people get into the homes speedily. Some instances you can find with houses, it may be because of adaptations have to be made to a home. It may be identified for a particular family that may have special needs within that family. That's not always the case. Sometimes it can be a procedural issue where something has fallen down. But local authorities are going to be central to delivery of public housing. So I'm asking and working with them in partnership that they're going to step up to the plate on this too. And, you know, many of them are doing that, but we've got to build capacity within the sector. I'm also going to be giving the resources to each local authority to have a housing delivery team, to employ people to do that. I was struck when I visited a number of local authorities across the country recently, in one local authority where there's only 2 engineers, and one of them was the Director of Service for Housing. So we need to rectify that. That's not in every area. Some areas they're well resourced, but where they aren't, we need to fill that gap. That's also included there in the plan. The 10% significant, by the way, if I could say. Like, that's adding every new development, 10% social protecting it, but 10% affordable through an affordable purchase scheme. And that's going to be happening. Right sizing we're doing more work on. I think right sizing happens, I speak from family experience with my own folks as well, when there is choice. And one of the issues when you talk to seniors, you know, people have a choice themselves. It's their home. You know, I'm acutely aware of that too. But sometimes when there's a choice in different types of homes that are built, where an individual or a couple, a senior, might decide, you know what, I may want to move into that apartment, I may want to move into that smaller house. But we don't have those options at the level that we need at the moment for people. That's why we need to get the supply up. That's why I've been very strong on things like design for community, that we've mixed estates that are designed different types of houses, apartments, smaller houses, and larger houses in the one developments. But we'll get there with it.
Adam Higgins from the Irish Sun. Minister O'Brien, just from my quick maths here, it looks like you're going to rely on more than half of these homes to be built by the private sector. How can you guarantee that the private sector will be able to build that many homes, or will build that many homes, particularly when some of the measures in this will bring down the price that they'll get for their buildings? And one for the Taoiseach. Minister Ryan said he would encourage Leaving Cert students to consider a career in construction, and we've heard that you're going to need 27,000 workers to build these homes. Are you actively encouraging people now to consider a career in construction? Is this a your country needs you sort of moment?
Sure.
Yeah, just on that, to tackle the housing crisis, we need to do it with every weapon in our armoury. Some will say that can just be delivered by the public sector, public sector delivery. That's not true. That won't work. You need both. You need both working together. So we do need the private sector. They're the small people who are out there working, small builders out there, small contractors who are building developments with our local authorities, but private developments too. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the state is the biggest builder under this plan. It's the biggest state intervention in the history of the state. There are some who will say they can deliver 20,000 public homes in 1 year. Not true. I know what the capacity is within our sector. Our targets are challenging, but they've been based on very detailed research about what we can do all across the country. So with private and public working together, with investment of €20 billion in housing, new measures around affordability so people can own their own home, which is crucially important. I actually think there will be a significant positive response from the sector in that space. So am I confident that we can reach those housing numbers that we've set out in the plan? Yes, I am. Is it going to be easy to do it? No, it's not. But we got to challenge ourselves with this, and that's what we're doing.
Yes, basically we will be encouraging Leaving Cert students to consider careers across the full spectrum in construction. And the Minister will be, already the initiatives have been taken, to be fair, by the Minister in respect of apprenticeships, for example, and government has signed off on those, which is actually increasing significantly the number of employers who are taking on apprentices, and that's going to be very important. And also the role of further education in Solace, and Solace will be producing a significant strategy around construction places and human capital issues pertaining to that, and getting more people engaged. In addition, we want more innovation as well in terms of people who are unemployed, for example, people who might be long-term unemployed, to provide courses that would be fit for purpose to enable people to come from an unemployed situation back into into construction with a sustainable future. I would have had experience of this before when I was in education. We managed to do technicians in 18 months, bringing back long-term unemployed people, a year-long course, then combined with a guaranteed placement with an employer. So we've got to be very innovative in terms of both the Leaving Cert cohort and making sure there's a sufficiency of places, apprenticeship places, and incentives have already been provided now for employers to take on board apprentices, but also then other schemes and programs working with employers as to how we can get people back into the industry.
A question for the Taoiseach on some other matters of the day. So back in July 2020...
We just maybe take the housing first, if there's a person at the back there. If you want to. when I come back to that, yeah. Yes, we'll come back to it. Just we'll do housing and wait.
Hi, Owen O'Cahan, Radio na Gaeltacht, Ceistan Taoiseach agus don Ara O'Brien. Tá forbert hís an Gaeltacht na rinne, tá Lorraine Clifford Lee, Shanador ó the 40 héin tuis Garán a dhéanamh faoin forbert tííocht sin. Bhí an Tara O'Brien a cainte na chud cainte bhí dúirt sé go bhfuil sé i gcuine Garán faoi forbert tííochta. Cá seasan si bhar an gceist áirithe seo?
Well, mar dúirt mé héin san a ráid a thug mé níos luúthe, caithfidh gach éine sa chóras palatíocht. You know, cinna dhéanamh gan bheith ag Garán look, tá mé chun feig go hórtút nó. Mar na chuirtú éon coist or mar Mary Lou MacDonald ag agus tá Garán i cé i gcuine míle sa gáchéad. So, you know, sé an rud a dúirt mé héin idasach ná ó héh party palatóí i ngach éon party. No, is géirchéim atá a going inis. Tá mé ag daileáil le géirchéim an a bhór ó héh cuasaí tííochta. Well, agus sin éon tím leis le dine a bhín ag Garán go formáilte. Well, níl an tólis crína go mó héh an na fána agus an, you know, an síl speisialta, you know, specificúlatá ann. Ach go generarálte sin an tóram agus an fealsún atá gom héana inis. Mar, you know, tá géircéim ann, géircéim uafásach ann. Caimid níos mó tithe a chrathú fud na tíre, just caimid. Níl golóir á thógáile going. Like sús le 50 míle i mbliana. Ní sin sáúil in éair.
Yeah, look, well, Fragar an Taoiseach an ceis, but níl mábalta ein rud ará faoi an Ryan mar tá sé sa cuasaí pleanála inis, but time ag obair le Conradh na Gaeilge, tá mar Ryan freisin ag obair le Conradh na Gaeilge faoi cuasaí pleanála sa Gaeltacht, chun an teanga a chamad agus a spraga in our Gaeltacht tríd an tír. So tá sé an obair atá mise ag fécant air. Agus níl am an ein rud ará faoi an cuasaí pleanála sa Ryan.
So to the Taoiseach, back in July last year, when Barry Cowan was sacked from his ministerial role, you said the following: "The challenges facing this government are unprecedented in scale, and the Irish people require nothing less than our full and undivided attention. It is in everyone's interest that the government not be distracted in any way from doing what is necessary to protect public health and our efforts to rebuild our society and our economy." Given the events of the last few days, and in fact the last few weeks, in regards to Catherine Pone's appointment and everything that's unfolded since, if this is the case, do you not think that the Tánaiste and indeed Minister Coveney should be given the same treatment? And if not, what is different? And will you be asking them to consider their positions?
Why don't you read out the previous 20 paragraphs of my statement back in July? I think you should. I don't mean that in any disparaging way. I just think it's important that if you're putting questions... No, I think if you read my statement, and I'll come back to it, and I'll read it myself now, on the 14th of July 2020, because I was very clear as to the core issue for a decision I had to take, which I didn't like taking, didn't want to take. I had appointed Barry Cowan, a good time for Barry Cowan, and I made it very clear that, you know, Deputy Cowan went into the Dáil initially. He was very remorseful about that, and I accepted that. And there was allegations emerged, and I said in my statement he was equally clear and emphatic that one detail of the allegation he was being presented with was completely untrue, namely that he sought to evade Gardaí at that time. I put that into the statement at the time. We had extensive discussions on this point last evening and again this morning. This is my statement now of July, which you've quoted from, or just one section of it, which you've quoted, when he shared with me for the first time the actual Garda record on the dispute. And following these discussions and having seen the Garda report this morning, it was my view that it raised additional issues requiring further explanation and clarification. I made this view clear to him and gave him space today to consider the matter further. However, he has decided that he's not prepared to address this allegation publicly and will not make any further statement or answer any questions on this issue in the House. This decision has created a situation where legitimate doubts and additional questions are being raised. Government colleagues are expected to address these. Indeed, I had been in the Dáil addressing the issue prior to this, and I made the point that I said this is simply untenable. It is my view that Deputy Cowan had an obligation to come before the House. And then I did go on to say that it's also my view that this issue is damaging to the ongoing work of the government. But let's be very clear, everybody knows here, because I stated it unequivocally at the time, why I had to take that very, in my view, a regrettable decision to have to take. No one wants to be in a position like this. But I made it very clear, because Deputy Cowan Barry Cowan had shared the content of the pulse record with me on the basis that I would respect the privacy of that. And also in relation and had a discussion with him as well in terms of his own explanation in terms of what transpired. And I simply said, you need to go into the House and you need to give the full, transparent story in relation to it. And he refused to do that. Now, I'd asked him as Taoiseach to do that, and as Minister he refused, and I was left with no alternative, sadly, but to take the decision that I took on that occasion. And I don't think that the situations are comparable. Minister Coveney has already written to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee saying he's going to go before the Foreign Affairs Committee, wants to go before it again, to fully address any issues that still arise or need to be addressed, or any queries that the members of that committee have in relation to the appointment of Catherine Zappone, which hasn't gone ahead, and he's prepared to do that. And I think he's not going to do that. He's prepared to give a very comprehensive presentation to that committee again, and take any questions that he has to answer. So, but you take I think it's very important, though, that I was surprised now early this morning and listening to the debate that somehow people had forgotten the core part, the core reason behind the decision I had to take on that occasion. The fact that something is a distraction on its own doesn't merit any action of the sort that you're suggesting. And I would put it this way to you as well. As Taoiseach, we have set out very substantive items that we need to address as a society. We've dealt with one of them today now. When I say we've dealt with it, we've produced a very comprehensive housing for all. That matters to people out there, outside of the bubble of Leinster House. Matters very much to them. 2 days ago, we produced a very comprehensive programme in relation to reopening our society, having come through a pandemic, a 100-year event, which shook to the very core our certainties about life and about society. Today, there's very good statistics emerging in terms of the economic recovery. That didn't happen by accident. It's happening because there's a government that's working well and doing things effectively on the big issues that matter to people. Economic recovery is happening right now in terms of economic growth, in terms of employment coming down, in terms of the deficit now not likely to be as high as we might have anticipated. I mean, this is because government took very significant action. And I think we need balance and perspective here. The idea that, and I think we do need to be accountable. It's accepted that the appointment of Catherine Zappone was not handled in the correct way, that the three-party leaders should have been notified. That is accepted. And that it is also accepted that was wrong. And Minister Coveney apologised to me for that and has said that. But let's have some balance and perspective in terms of the big issues that this country is facing. I'm very clear about this. And I think there's a bit of melodrama and over-dramatics about it, if I'm frank. That's where I personally come to this issue from. And we now have the National Development Plan to do. We now have the Climate Action Plan to do. We have a budget to do. And I'm going to keep focused on those issues. Government is working in good faith together. The three leaders are working in good faith together. That's the way I see it. I fully accept other people have a different perspective on that. But within myself, I'm comfortable about this and the actions I've taken.
Minister O'Brien, I just want to ask you, is there anything in this plan that professionalises the rental market?
Sorry, no.
You're right. Is there anything in this plan that professionalises the rental market? I mean, there's so many renters out there that, come into contact with some landlords, I'm not saying all, but some, I'm one of those, previously who, you know, was told if I didn't pay a certain price for a room, tough luck, I'll get the money anyway. And it's happening because the supply is not there. I mean, there's stories in the paper today about students in UCC who are going to miss their first week in college and be marked absent because they can't get a room. So what's in your plan here? And then secondly, regarding the decision to postpone introducing a vacant property tax, yeah.
No, not postpone it.
Until next year, though, is it not coming into place?
It just said, sorry, no, you finish and I'll answer.
No, just
Go on.
why isn't it happening now? Like, what's,
Right.
you know,
Yeah,
why hasn't it happened sooner? Like, how long have you been working on this plan? What data are you waiting for?
Okay. Yeah,
Thanks.
well, it's no problem. To answer your last question first, we need the data, and the LPT has been, we passed legislation just before the summer recess to reform the local property tax, and the Minister Donoghue and I and others worked on that, and as part of that now, in relation to seeking new valuations across the country, every homeowner will be written out to, and we will collect the data on vacancy, because we need to know what is vacant and for what reason. So if you take it, for argument's sake, again, something in this plan on vacancy, there's about 9,500 homes that we know from previous surveys that where people have sought exemptions from paying local property tax because the owners of the home are ill, maybe in long-term residential care or in hospitals or in nursing homes. So we've amended as a government the Fair Deal to be able to remove some of the barriers for those homes to be rented out, should the family wish to do so and should the homeowner wish to do so, or indeed to be sold. We can only do that on the basis of having the data. So we will bring forward a vacant property tax once we have the data following the survey in the autumn. So I mean this seriously, we're not actually delaying it. It had not been planned to be introduced this October. We'll have the data, and the Minister Donoghue will be working to bring forward measures around that next year. I think it'll be significant. I know, and we all know, infamous cases in this city and in Cork and others, where we can see some newer developments potentially, where parts of them are left empty. And we want as a government to be able to make sure that where people are doing that, where there'll be a reverse incentive to make sure that they do not. To answer your first question, we've done a lot actually in the last year with regard to the Residential Tenancies Board. Any landlord who breaks the law, and it's open to any tenant or prospective tenant, even themselves or through a third party, to lodge a complaint that we take very seriously, and we deal with them. We've doubled the resourcing within the RTB in the last budget, the Residential Tenancies Board. They have significant powers in that space. We've also brought in, as you know, we've linked rents to inflation in the rent pressure zones. Anyone who's breaching that is breaking the law. And actually, that's a new criminal offence. And it's a new criminal offence that is part of the legislation. That should not happen. Will there be bad landlords? And will there, in very small instances, there are. Thankfully, 98% of tenancies, there's never a problem. It's about 2% of all tenancies, about 300,000, end up in dispute. And we want to help in that space where that happens. So about the professionalisation of landlords, I'm not sure. There are lots of small mom and pop landlords who are good and who want to stay in the market, and we want to be able to do that because we're always going to need rental property. But most renters, and can't speak for yourself, nor would I, most renters want to be able to have something more secure. So cost rental is going to be a big deal in this space. And affordable purchase, where people who are renting, in most independent surveys that I've seen, people who are renting want to be able to buy if they could buy at an affordable rate. They're now going to have the tools to do that through the affordable housing measures that we're bringing forward and that we've already legislated for. So we're not saying, well, here's our plan and we're going to go do it. We have the legislation in place and now we have the money to do it, so the schemes start now.
Can I just say on the vacant home tax, because I'm sort of working on this a bit with Pascal, and the data that we have on vacancy isn't very reliable at the moment. So you'll often hear very high numbers about the number of vacant homes in Ireland, sometimes because they're vacant on census night. But a house can be vacant on census night for all sorts of reasons. It might be for sale. The person might be away for the weekend. It might be a house in an area where there is very little demand for housing. So we don't have very good data, accurate data on what vacancy looks like in Ireland. That's all being collected in November as part of the revaluation. And then we'll know what are the real reasons for homes being vacant and how long are they vacant for. And that will allow us then to bring in legislation in the first quarter of next year to bring in a vacant home tax and then apply it then, if you like, from the end of 2022 for payment in 2023, and that's the plan that we're working towards, because it is, like, to me, it's immoral during a housing crisis that anyone would leave a house vacant or an apartment vacant for a prolonged period of time, or just because they can't get a high enough rent for it. And there is a bit of that happening around this city, so we have to put a stop to that. But sometimes homes can be vacant for a very good reason. People might go and live in another country for 3 months, and they don't want to move all their stuff out and rent it. So. But you have to pass a law to do that, and what we're going to get from this data in November is the reason for vacancy. We'll be able to know exactly which homes are vacant, for how long, and what the reason is for that. And you'll understand yourself, if you're imposing a tax, you can't just go around and see a few apartments that look vacant in a certain part of town. You need a legal basis for it, and we passed the law to get that data. We'll have that data collected in November. We'll be able to then legislate next year, and we're committed to doing this. We're not dragging our heels on at all. Like Pascal's planning to the finance bill done before Christmas, and that follows on from the budget, and that'll have some tax measures in it, potentially relating to the vacant site tax and the unzoned land, and then to have another property tax bill then in the first quarter next year. Yeah, see, that's the kind of thing we need to decide, actually, and those are the policy questions. And we don't actually know at the moment how many properties are vacant for how long. And that's the kind of data we need, because you need information before you can decide policy.
Well, I think, Christine, to be fair, the Tánaiste just said we know it's an issue, and that's why we're going to do it. We need to know the scale of the issue and where it is, and a tax has got to be applied to it, and we aren't going to delay on that. I think to take a certain, if you were to take you're saying like a residential investment property, to be able to categorise that separately, well, how do you categorise the different types of investment properties, from the mom and pop landlord where it might be empty to others? But this is going to be done. This is a plan for housing to 2030, and this will be done next year, and we
next year applied at the end of 2022 to kick in 2023. The Sunday Business Report there back in May had that block there in Bracknell of 190 apartments, and 100 of them are vacant. Are they going to be vacant?
No, what I'd say to you is this: we don't want to see any vacant property, and the Taoiseach said I believe it is immoral if there are funds or other owners who are leaving large swathes of property empty in the middle of a housing crisis. But what we've done, this is one element of it. And every measure we take here is a considered measure that's going to have a positive impact. And I don't actually accept that that's a delay in doing it. And I say that respectfully. We have to base what we do on facts and on data. And we're going to that, like what we've done on the Fair Deal. So I would expect on the Fair Deal properties that we'll have a minimum of there's around 9,000 properties affected. Even if we were to get a third of them back into use in certain areas, that's significant by one measure alone that Minister Mary Butler, ourselves and government have agreed. And there's lots of different things in housing about how you get to resolve it. And that's why we've 213 different action points here, all that are doable. Some have challenges, some require legislation, but we'll do it.
I should say, just for clarity, we will legislate for it next year. It might be possible to collect it next year as well, but I can't guarantee that, but we'll certainly legislate for it in the first half of next year.
Sorry, it's a very substantive decision. And like any initiative of this kind, a lot of hard work has to go into it, just as went into the property tax itself. A lot of data collecting and a lot of work has to go into that, because there can be, and a lot of detailed work has to be done. But the Minister for Finance is very clear in terms of a timeline on the legislative front.
Yeah, just moving back onto the Marion stuff. I was going to ask, actually, the question I was going to ask was, would you like to apologise to Barry Cowan for the leeway you've shown to Tánaiste and the Foreign Affairs Minister, and you weren't readily going to show him, but since you're showing up to press conferences with speeches from a year ago, I'm guessing that's not the case. But would you, if you look at the other cases, the other people who've had to fall on their sword over recent months, let's say Phil Hogan, which it wasn't even his attendance, but it was the story kept changing over those days and week, and that's the reason why you lost confidence in him. And similarly, Darragh Cleary, he got pretty swift justice from you and had to go within the click of a finger. when you've given the Tánaiste here and the Foreign Affairs Minister weeks, months to deal with this issue. And the Tánaiste, or the Foreign Affairs Minister has now presented another version of events to the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm not sure which version this is. We could be on 3, 4, 5. You'll find that there is holes in that version, and that'll be interrogated by the committee. A member of your own government and the Fine Gael party, Charlie Flanagan, was the one who raised the fact that there was inconsistencies. Yet here we are, still distracted by this still thing. The Taoiseach of the country showing up to the launch of his biggest housing policy with a speech he made in, was it July last year? So do you not think that you should possibly take the time to look back on how you treated those people, how you treated Phil Hogan, Darragh Cleary, and who was at Barrycown, and the leeway that you're now showing to your Fine Gael colleagues in government for a thing that is drawn out and is changing, and we still don't know the real story about it. Like even, and this one was for the Taoiseach himself, is that we've been told that Catherine Zappone didn't lobby for this position. We were told this. There was a statement issued to the Foreign Affairs Committee saying this, and then a day later, the Tánaiste issues text message in which she asks him, what's the story with this job? Like, how is that not lobbying? And how are you not seeing this and the rest of the government? And if the other ministers want a question, how would you rate the Taoiseach and the Tánaiste's performance throughout this controversy?
Yeah, you see, Philip, I disagree fully with the perspective you've adopted on this. You've made a statement there. You haven't asked questions. No, sorry, I'm not going to interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you. You said I showed up here with a speech. I didn't show up here. I came here well-resourced with material because a wrong context was put on what I did last year. I was asked a question about a speech I gave. I was asked a question about it. And I clarified, because I had to clarify, because of the type of things you were saying, and others, in terms of what you just said to me there. I'm quite entitled to go back to clarify the situation for people in terms of what happened, in terms of that decision I had to, which I didn't like taking. And the bottom line was I'd asked the minister in my cabinet to go before the Dáil to clarify issues of significant importance that had been raised in the public domain. And the minister decided he wasn't going to do that. He wanted to go another route. And I felt that wasn't tenable. It's not directly comparable to this. It's not. And why I made the points I made here is to simply give the truth in terms of the rationale behind the decision I took. I would disagree fully, not most of it, the way you're adopting this. I mean, it seems to be that you want to create this tension or this division between maybe the Fianna Fáil party and the Fine Gael party and create the tensions and let the story run. Like, that's my perception. And my view is it's an issue that does need to be accounted for. The minister is going before the Oireachtas Committee. I would make the point, and I genuinely believe this, we are talking about a part-time position of an envoy for freedom of information, or sorry, for freedom of expression and LGBT. That's what we're actually talking about here now. I don't think it's at the scale that you think it's at, if you want my honest opinion. I do not think it's at the level that you are putting it at. I genuinely don't. And I just think, there's a tendency in modern political discourse to elevate issues of this kind to a level that they should not be elevated to. So Darragh Cleary took a decision at the time, and I had consultations with Darragh, and his comments are publicly on the record. He paid a very high price. Very sad, because he's a very fine public representative, and so is Barry Cohn. And he did pay a high price in terms of the attendance at that event, which again followed government decisions and regulations that government had taken in respect of COVID-19. So I don't accept the presentation of the situation as you've put forward.
I can just say just in addition to that, I think what you're trying to do is say that an apple is an orange. The outdoor gathering in the Merrion did not break any government regulations, did not breach any law. When it comes to that other gathering, there's a prosecution pending. It's a very different set of circumstances. I regret going anywhere near the place, even if it was only for 40 minutes, absolutely, because of the controversy it's caused. But to compare an event that was not in breach of any government laws or regulations with one where there's a prosecution pending really is saying that an apple is an orange. Notwithstanding that, I regret having anything to do with it. But that's a fact, and it's a fact that I think is only fair to report. In relation to lobbying, you can see the text for yourself. Minister Zappone asked me if I knew anything about it. I said I didn't. If you look at the definition of the Lobbying Act, seeking information is not lobbying. Lobbying is when you ask somebody to do something for you, or to change a law, or get something. She didn't do that. Yeah, but look at the definition of lobbying in the Lobbying Act, and seeking of information is not lobbying. It's there in black and white in the Lobbying Act. You're trying to say an orange is an apple.
What was she trying to do by asking you about the job? You don't think she was seeking to get you to fast track or get it signed off? You don't think she wasn't trying to ask you to use your influence as the second most famous politician in this country to get her that job?
And she didn't at any point. Those are the facts.
Thanks. Were you aware that Simon Coveney's phone was hacked?
At the time, I don't believe I was. I'm not going to say definitively, but I've asked him about that, and it was a phishing event, which was reported to the Gardaí and to the head of security within government. That's my understanding of that. And
it was reported by some of you at the time.
Yeah, apparently.
If you Google it.
It was in the public domain.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much.